Journal continues. Thanks for being with us today. I'm your host, Matt Pitta. We're continuing our two-part series today on the 40th anniversary of the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown. We're on the road today in Provincetown at their headquarters here. We're speaking with the CEO and the president of the center, Rich Delaney, Charles Stormy Mayo, a senior scientist and founder, Graham Geist, senior scientist emeritus, and executive assistant and communication officer, Catherine McCourt. When we last left off, Rich, you were talking about or answering my question about, we were kind of almost, I think, 40 years ago at this make or break point on where we were going. And you had some great comments there about the creation of wetlands acts and things that the organization was working on. Stormy, I'm going to go to you and have you go back and think about that time 40 years ago when you look at where the Cape was and what it could have become. And, I think back, there are certain areas of the Cape that I always think you can look at that showed where we may have gone. You look at some locations in areas of Dennis, places like that, some in Harwich, along in Yarmouth as well, where you have big hotels that were popping up one after another, literally right on the water. And I think, obviously, the National Seashore had an impact on stopping that, but that was definitely one way we could have gone in terms of what was going to happen with our water protection and such. So take us back and what you were seeing back then and the concerns you had and where we are now in 2016.
Well, I grew up in Provincetown, and so I had a vision, much given to me by my father, who fished out of here, and there was then, growing up, and then certainly the beginning of the center, there was a great concern about us perhaps pushing ourselves without knowing it over a tipping point. And that would largely have been because of excessive growth that would have changed the character of this spit of land forever. We would probably not recognize it very well. Many things, of course, happened in the interim, and I like to think, with respect to that vision, that we almost pushed it over the edge, and it was largely because of groups like the Center for Coastal Studies and APCC in those days, and other environmental groups that really informed us as to where we might have gone. And I think we can appreciate where we have ended up, and that, of course, is what we still do today. I should say, back in those days, we did not worry about climate change. And now, if there is any truly profound influence that we're going to see, slow though it may be, it is the climate change, which now in the science is a settled story. We know there's not an argument as to whether it's going to happen. The speed and depth of it still remain a question. So just about as soon as we brought at least some of the development under control, we now confront one of the most profound issues that could impact any spit of land out into the ocean. Of course, Cape Cod in some ways is more pressed by the climate change issues than much of the world because of where we are and how climate change has its influences. So it is very interesting to see that we stepped from those early years when we were trying to control what we did on the land to these present days when we try to control what we're doing on the land again, but in a different way.
Graham, do you remember back 40 years, what were the concerns you had as a scientist? Did you have kind of a vision of what was going to happen and where you wanted to go to try to deal with some of these issues that you were facing back then?
Well, yeah, I can answer that for myself and to a considerable extent. The first part of what I'm going to say applies, in my opinion, to Stormy and Barbara as well. I mentioned before that we were all young, and each of us had a tendency toward environmentalism, a concern for the planet, for the environment around us. And remember that the center was formed just the decade after the 60s, the environmental movement, Earth Day, and all of that awareness. And we represented that. So, I was very concerned about how I could apply my interest and my training, at that point being in both geology and oceanography, into the world around me, so that I could be doing work that I wanted to do, that I enjoyed doing, but that also would be useful. And as I mentioned earlier, an opportunity for that came directly when it was clear that the state needed help in controlling the growth that Stormy mentioned and Rich had mentioned along the coast. We needed to understand better what was happening to the shore. It's true that the population was coming and the coast was getting more crowded, but it's also true that the coast was changing. And so the effects of that growth were vastly amplified by the fact that it wasn't being done in recognition or in sufficient understanding of how the coast itself was changing. And so that was an exciting time, and that is indeed what we spent a lot of time working on.
We've seen these pressures over the years, going back the last 4 decades and even before that on Cape Cod, with development pressures, economic growth pressures versus the environment. One thing I've always said when covering these types of stories is that when you have this, I don't see that there's a debate between the environment and the economy, because on Cape Cod, the environment is the economy. It's really as simple as that. I know we always try to have diversification of our economy here on Cape Cod, but I always maintain at the end of the day, it's the environment. People come here to spend money and to vacation and to take part in our environment because it is so pristine here. So talk a little bit about that, kind of that battle, if you will, my words there, over the past couple of years. Stormy?
Yeah,
do you agree with that?
Yeah, very much so. And if you look back at our beginnings, it was the very idea that you've put out, that the environment is our economy, was actually in question in those days. People might have different ways of slicing it these days, but I don't think anyone would argue with that particular point. And I like to think that environmental groups and scientific groups like ours are one of the reasons why we have all worked together and come to that conclusion. It would be very difficult to find people looking at the overall economy and lifestyle of Cape Cod and not agree that the underpinning is the environment.
Rich, you're out a lot in the field meeting with community groups and really pushing the message, the overall message and mission of the center. How do you carry that message out now in 2016 in terms of, preserving the environment, water quality, et cetera?
Well, I think the new framework that we just alluded to, just discussed, the fact that the economy is based on a healthy environment, is well known. I'll illustrate that. We have lots of partners. The center it works in very nice partnerships with Cape Cod National Seashore, with the University of Massachusetts, with Stellwagen, but we also have a partnership with the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce. I happen to serve on that board. And whereas, as you suggested a few minutes ago, Matt, there used to be this polarization between environmentalists on one side and the business community on the other side, the Chamber's businesses are leading the charge to have a clean water environment for Cape Cod. They see it as fundamental to their business interests. That's a whole new paradigm, and it's very, very powerful. And I always reinforce that message everywhere I go.
We're on the road today on the Sunday Journal talking about the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown's 40th anniversary and getting a lot of the history and the background as to how this organization came to be. So let's come forward to 2016 now, talk about the various activities that you're involved in right now. Over the years, and I've always been interested in this, how was there either a transition or an evolution for the center to become literally this worldwide leader when it comes to strandings, whale protection, et cetera? How did that evolve? Who wants to take that one? Stormy?
The interest in whales started with one of the, at least at this end of the Cape, one of the important engines of the economy. So an odd relationship early on, and that is whale watching. And whale watching has the extra benefit that people not only look at whales, but they look at the environment. So the center early on, very early on, was associated with whale watching. That association in one form or another continues down to this very day. It gave us our entree into an area of study that the center became well known for. But the exciting thing is that the institution went from that rather core interest to what is clearly now a multidisciplinary institution. We have an extraordinary geology department. Graham represents that and doing some really landmark work in one of the most active geological areas probably in North America. And we also have a very active water quality monitoring program, which is really at the very peak of that kind of studying a relatively pristine environment before anything happens to it. What could be better for that economic engine of the environment than to have really good water quality information to inform the public of what's happening? And so with seals and with fisheries work, we are now multidisciplinary. We weren't to begin with. There was Graham's interest in geology and oceanography, and Barbara and my interest in marine biology, but we now have some very distinct areas to contribute to society.
When I know you're still out there on the boats on a regular basis, is there still as much excitement for you when you go out now as there was 40 years ago when you're heading out on the water?
Well, I've often said that science is not a bunch of facts, it's a bunch of mysteries. Scientists are much more interested, or should be much more interested, in what we don't know than what we do. Of course, you have to build that on facts to begin with. So if you're thrilled by mystery, then you can't, in the case of whales, for instance, you can't possibly have anything but excitement when you see them, because they are still mysterious creatures, even to those of us who study them.
Graham, having been here from the beginning as well, every organization always likes to have a forward vision as well. So where do you see the future, specifically in some of your fields, that the center needs to focus on? What are some of the threats, if you will, that we're looking at that you think needs to be continuing to be looked upon?
Well, I think the threats would relate to society. That is all the environmental challenges which have been discussed already, and the need for society to understand the environment so as to deal with them as best we can. And so I think the role of the center in that is to continue along the paths that we have been walking along so far. What happens in our science happens in all sciences, and that is that, or can happen in all sciences, and that is that as new tools become available, as we understand, we have better electronics, as we have a better instrumentation in general, we find new ways to answer these questions that Stormy has referred to try to increase our understanding. And that's been coming up over these 40 years. Today we use LIDAR. It's a form of sort of sonar from the air, if you like, to understand how the form of the shore now. And we have wonderful instruments for seafloor mapping, which Rich has gotten funding for us here to pursue. And applying those, we're able to proceed with with answering or getting increasing numbers of answers to increasing numbers of questions as they come in, to to help society understand this world around them.
Catherine, we're quickly running out of time. I have to get you back into the conversation because we want to let people know what's, in terms of marking the celebration community-wide, what's planned to mark the 40th anniversary?
Our principal event this year is going to be a 40th anniversary gala, and that's going to be on June 11th in Provincetown Town Hall. Tickets are on sale now at our website, coastalstudies.org. And that's actually just going to be an opportunity for us to recognize and to thank Graham and Stormy for their vision 40 years ago, and for us to share with the public as well just basically what Graham was discussing, our vision for the future and our plans as we go forward. We also have several private sunset whale watches that we've organized this year. We're still working closely with the dolphin fleet, so they're actually going to take us out for 3 sunset cruises out to Stillwagon Bank. Hopefully we'll get to see lots of whales out there. So those 3 will be on July 16th and 30th and on August 20th. And throughout the year we're going to have smaller events here and there throughout town, and hopefully further up Cape as well, so that we can involve people who are not just here on the Outer Cape who know us already, but so that we can let people know elsewhere about the important work that we do here.
Rich, we're going to wrap things up with you. I'm going to give you the next 40-year vision for the center. Where are you going now? You're marking 40. What's coming ahead? You'll all be here with another 40 years, so we'll all be here and do the 80th anniversary.
Yeah. Well, we all have said it. Climate change is going to frame the next 40 years. It has to start right away. And one of the most important contributions our work in the past 40 years can contribute is that we have some unique databases. Stormy's work, Graham's work, our water quality work, our humpback whale work, we have 25 and 30-year-old databases. That's the kind of information that scientists need to see what the trends are and to evaluate that. So we all of a sudden we find our last 40 years' work, as valuable as it was for the problems that day, those days, might be even more valuable going forward. So we're going to continue doing the good work we've been doing in the past. Just the stakes have gone up considerably higher because of the impacts of climate change, which, by the way, are going to be disproportionately felt here in the Northeast, more than maybe any place else in the world. So that's the challenge. The good news is, and I've been involved in ocean and coastal management issues all my life, and I've worked with a lot of wonderful people, but you could not find a more dedicated, talented, passionate group of people than the 30 people we have here at the Center for Coastal Studies. I am so proud that I'm part of it. And we always invite more people to join us as members, to come in as volunteers, to attend our events. We'll use our information on the website. We really do see ourselves, and even more so in the future, as a marine community center. We're part of the community, and we want to invite the community to be part of us.
Rich Delaney, the President and CEO of the Center for Coastal Studies, Charles Stormy Mayo, Senior Scientist and Founder, Graham Geist, fellow founder, Senior Scientist Emeritus, and Catherine McCourt, Executive Assistant and Communications Officer. Thank you so much to the 4 of you for inviting me up here today for a great story that I know our listeners have been enjoying today, to learn all about the last 40 years and what's ahead as we move forward. So happy 40th anniversary to all of you, and thanks for having me up here today. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Matt.
Matt.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us today on this segment of the program. I'm your host, Matt Pitto.